The sun dipped low over Viridia, spilling gold across Lyra Sloane's penthouse windows. At 7 months pregnant, she had learned to savor the stillness. Until tonight. Her husband, Daniel Rowe, was in Chicago, chasing the deal of his career. He'd promised to call the moment it was done. But as the city lights bloomed below, her phone stayed dark. A tight knot of unease grew in her chest. Then, the first sharp pain struck, deep, wrong, and terrifying. Blood followed. Alone in a glass tower, Lyra realized the fairy tale was fracturing, and the man she trusted most was already gone. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. The late afternoon sun, the color of warm honey, slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Lyra traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the chamomile steam warming her face. Outside, the sprawling metropolis of Viridia hummed with a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Here, in their glass-walled sanctuary, the only sounds were the soft strains of a Debussy piece and the gentle, rhythmic kick of the new life nestled beneath her heart. At 7 months pregnant, Lyra had finally embraced the serene stillness her husband, Daniel, had so carefully curated for her. "He spoils you, you know," her mother had said, half in jest, half in awe, during her last visit. This apartment, the private drivers, the chef on call. "It's a fairy tale, darling." Lyra had simply smiled. It was a fairy tale. Daniel Rowe, the charismatic wunderkind of the tech world, had swept into her life like a force of nature. She was a quiet, introspective art curator, content with her world of canvases and history. He was all dazzling smiles, boundless energy, and ambition that seemed to burn as brightly as the city lights. He'd pursued her with a single-minded intensity that was both overwhelming and intoxicating. He'd made her feel like the calm center of his chaotic, high-stakes universe. "You ground me, Lyra," he'd whisper, his lips against her hair, his hand resting possessively on her growing belly. "You and our little one. You're my anchor." Today, however, a strange disquiet settled over her. Daniel was in Chicago for a 2-day merger meeting, a deal he'd been chasing for months. It was the final push, he'd said, the one that would cement his legacy. He'd called her that morning, his voice crackling with excitement. "I'm closing it, Lyra. I can feel it. By this time tomorrow, Rowe Innovations will be a global powerhouse. Think of the future our son will have." He'd promised to call the moment the papers were signed. "I'll be on the first jet back. We'll celebrate, just the 3 of us." But the afternoon had bled into evening, and the city lights had begun to glitter like a blanket of scattered diamonds. Her phone, resting on the velvet cushion beside her, remained dark and silent. She'd sent him a text an hour ago. "Thinking of you. Hope it's going well. Love you." No reply. She tried not to be the anxious wife, the cliché of the pregnant woman needing constant reassurance. Daniel was a whirlwind. Meetings ran late. Phones died. There were 100 logical explanations. Still, she couldn't shake the unease. It was a physical sensation, a cold knot tightening deep in her abdomen. She pushed herself up from the plush sofa, the weight of the baby shifting, and walked to the window. The city was a breathtaking tapestry of light and motion, a world Daniel was conquering. But tonight it felt alienating, vast, and indifferent. She tried his phone again, straight to voicemail. "Hi, it's me again," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Just getting a little worried. Call me when you get a chance, okay? I love you." As she ended the call, a sharp, searing pain shot through her lower back, so intense it stole her breath. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. The cold knot of anxiety instantly morphed into a hot spike of fear. It couldn't be. It was too soon. 2 more months. The doctor had said everything was perfect. She stumbled back to the sofa, her heart hammering against her ribs. Another wave of pain, fiercer this time, radiated from her back to her front, a brutal, clenching fist. This wasn't right. This wasn't Braxton Hicks. This was a violent, tearing sensation. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely unlock it. She scrolled to her best friend's name, Harper, but before she could press the call button, another spasm seized her, and she saw a dark, terrifying stain spreading across the pale fabric of her maternity dress. Blood, panic, cold and absolute, washed over her. The Debussy piece ended, plunging the room into an unnerving silence, broken only by her own ragged breaths. She needed Daniel. She needed to hear his voice, to have him tell her it was all going to be okay, to have him take charge in that effortlessly capable way of his. She dialed his number again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. Tears streamed down her face, hot and blurring her vision. The pain was a constant, roaring tide now. With a surge of desperate clarity, she dialed 911. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, a stark contrast to the terror ripping through her. She managed to give her address, her voice a broken whisper, before another contraction buckled her, and the phone slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the marble floor. As she lay there, curled on the expensive rug, the city lights mocking her through the vast, empty windows, her world narrowed to 2 agonizing truths. She was losing her baby, and the man who had promised her a fairy tale was gone. The silence from his phone was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a void, a betrayal that was just beginning to unfold. It was the sound of her life breaking apart. The silence in the hospital was a different beast altogether. It wasn't the peaceful, Debussy-filled quiet of her penthouse. It was a sterile, menacing hush, punctuated by the rhythmic, electronic beeping that was the only testament to her and her baby's fragile hold on life. The world had shrunk to the confines of a private room in the maternity ICU, a space painted in a soothing but impersonal shade of blue. Wires tethered her to a constellation of monitors, their glowing green lines a constant, jagged reminder of the precipice on which she teetered. The doctors spoke in hushed, urgent tones just outside her door. She caught snippets of their conversations, words that felt like stones pelting her already bruised consciousness. Placental abruption, severe hemorrhaging, fetal distress, emergency C-section. Each term was a nail in the coffin of the perfect natural birth she had envisioned, the one she and Daniel had discussed in late-night whispers, planning the music, the lighting, the first moments they would hold their son. Where was he? The question was a relentless drumbeat against the inside of her skull. The paramedics had found her phone. The nurses had tried his number, his assistant's number, his office. Voicemail. Voicemail. Unanswered. He's in a very important meeting, Lyra had found herself explaining, the words tasting like ash. In Chicago. His phone is probably off. He'll be here. As soon as he knows, he'll be here. She was trying to convince herself as much as them, but as the hours bled into a grey, terrifying dawn, the excuse wore thin, fraying at the edges until it was transparent. Important meetings ended. Phones were turned back on. A man whose wife was in critical condition, whose child was being born 2 months prematurely, would not be unreachable, unless he didn't want to be reached. It was Harper who finally broke through the wall of medical jargon and professional sympathy. She burst into the room like a hurricane of protective energy, her fiery red hair a stark contrast to the pale blue walls. She took one look at Lyra, pale and small in the oversized hospital bed, and her face, usually so quick to smile, hardened with a fierce resolve. "Oh, Lyra," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. She rushed to the bedside, her cool hand enveloping Lyra's. "I came as soon as I got the message. What happened? Where is that bastard?" The dam of Lyra's composure, so precariously constructed, finally broke. Sobs racked her body, each one sending a fresh jolt of pain through her abdomen. "I don't know, Harper," she wept. "He's not answering. Something's wrong. The baby. They're saying they have to take him now." Harper's grip tightened. Okay. We deal with first things first. You and this little fighter. That's all that matters right now. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone." And she wasn't. When they wheeled Lyra into the blindingly bright operating room, Harper was there, gowned and masked. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and love, the last thing Lyra saw before the anesthesia pulled her under. She woke up groggy, a raw, burning line across her belly. The beeping was still there, a steady, monotonous rhythm. But there was a new sound, a tiny, heart-wrenching cry from a nearby incubator. Her son. He was alive. A nurse with kind eyes smiled down at her. "He's a fighter, Mrs. Rowe. 3 pounds, 4 ounces. He's got a long road ahead in the NICU, but he's here." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, this time of profound, aching relief. "Can I see him?" "Of course." They wheeled the incubator closer. He was so small, a fragile bird wrapped in a nest of tubes and wires. His skin was translucent, his tiny chest rising and falling with a terrifying fragility. But he was perfect. Her son. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the plastic case that separated them. A wave of love, so fierce and primal it eclipsed everything else, washed over her. Have you reached my husband?" she asked, the question almost an afterthought, a ghost of a former life. The nurse's kind expression faltered for a fraction of a second. "We've left several messages, dear, with his assistant as well. We haven't heard back yet." Harper, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. "I'll handle it," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. She gave Lyra's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You just rest. You focus on getting strong for your little boy." "What have you named him?" Lyra looked at the tiny, fighting form of her son. They had a name picked out, a strong, classic name Daniel had loved. But saying it now felt wrong, like a betrayal of this new, harsh reality. "Ethan," she whispered. "His name is Ethan." As Lyra drifted in and out of a painkiller-induced haze, Harper transformed into an investigator. She sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, her laptop glowing in the dim light, her phone pressed to her ear. Her conversations were a low, angry murmur. She called Daniel's office again, this time refusing to be fobbed off to an assistant. She called the hotel where he was supposed to be staying in Chicago. She called the airline. The pieces she put together were sharp and cruel. The merger meeting had concluded yesterday afternoon, a resounding success. Daniel had never checked into his hotel for the second night. His flight back to Viridia, the one he was supposed to be on, had departed without him. His assistant, a normally unflappable woman named Fiona, sounded flustered, evasive. He had a last-minute change of plans, Miss Quinn. He said he was unreachable for a few days. A personal matter. "A personal matter?" Harper had hissed into the phone, her voice dripping with disbelief. "His wife is in the ICU. His son was just born. What personal matter could possibly be more important than that?" Fiona's silence was a confession. The final devastating blow came not from a phone call, but from a photograph. A snarky gossip blog, one that revelled in the missteps of the rich and famous, had posted it just an hour ago. The caption was smug. Tech mogul Daniel Rowe celebrates his big merger, not with his pregnant wife, but with a mystery blonde in Paris. Ooh la la! The photo was grainy, clearly taken with a cell phone from across a candlelit bistro. But there was no mistaking him. Daniel, laughing, his head tilted back in that familiar, carefree way. And beside him, her face, illuminated by the soft glow of the candle, was a stunning blonde woman. Her hand was resting on his, her gaze adoring. It was Celeste Morrill, the ambitious new VP of marketing at his company, a woman Lyra had met briefly at a holiday party and instantly disliked for the proprietary way she looked at her husband. Harper stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. He wasn't just unreachable, he was celebrating, in Paris, with another woman, while his wife was bleeding out and his son was fighting for his life. She looked over at Lyra, sleeping fitfully, her brow furrowed in pain. She looked at the incubator, at the tiny, fragile baby named Ethan. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of Daniel. It was a confirmation, a deliberate, calculated and monstrous abandonment. And Harper knew, with a sickening certainty, that she was the one who would have to tell her. For 2 days, Harper held the terrible truth like a shard of glass in her hand, afraid to move, for fear of causing an irreparable wound. She became Lyra's gatekeeper, fielding calls from concerned but distant relatives and filtering the syrupy, insincere messages from Daniel's office. She spent her hours shuttling between Lyra's ICU room and the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, where Ethan lived in his plastic box, a tiny warrior in a silent, sterile war. Lyra, weak but lucid, was focused solely on her son. Her recovery was slow, the physical trauma compounded by the gnawing anxiety of Daniel's silence. She'd stopped asking about him directly, the question too heavy with unspoken fear. Instead, she'd ask, "Any news?" Her eyes pleading with Harper to give her an answer that wouldn't break her. And Harper would lie. His assistant said he's wrapping things up. There was a complication with the deal. Each lie was a small tear in the fabric of their friendship. But it felt like a necessary mercy. On the 3rd day, the doctors delivered a blow of their own. Ethan is strong, the neonatologist, a kind but weary-looking man named Dr. Samuel, explained. But his lungs are severely underdeveloped. He's going to be here for a while. Weeks, maybe months. It's going to be a long, expensive road. The word expensive hung in the air. Daniel had always handled the finances. He'd insisted on it. "Let me take care of everything, Lyra. Your only job is to be happy." She had a credit card, of course, for shopping and lunches, but she had no idea about their larger financial landscape, the intricate world of stocks, investments and accounts that funded their fairy tale life. "I need to call the insurance company," Lyra said, her voice thin. I should figure this out." She looked at Harper, a flicker of her old, capable self returning. "Can you get my laptop from the apartment? And my wallet? The insurance cards are in there." Harper knew this was the moment she could no longer stall. The practicalities of life, of hospital bills that were already climbing into the stratosphere, were crashing the gates of their insulated crisis. "Of course," Harper said, her heart sinking. When she returned from the penthouse, the air in the hospital room felt different, charged with an unspoken dread. Lyra was sitting up, her face pale but determined. Harper handed her the laptop and the wallet, watching as her friend's trembling fingers pulled out a sleek, black credit card. "I tried to order some food," Lyra said, her voice flat. "Something other than this hospital mush. The card was declined." Harper's breath caught in her throat. "It's probably just a fraud alert, Lyra. You know how they are." "I tried the debit card too," Lyra continued, not looking at her. "Declined. Insufficient funds." She finally lifted her gaze, and her eyes were dark with a terrifying, dawning comprehension. "What's going on, Harper? Tell me the truth." Harper sank into the visitor's chair, the weight of the last 3 days crushing her. She took a deep breath and began, her voice soft but steady. She told Lyra about the phone calls, about the flight he never took, about the evasive assistant. She didn't mention Paris or the photograph. Not yet. She wanted to break the fall, to cushion the blow. But Lyra was smarter than that. She'd always had a quiet, unnerving intuition. She opened the laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed Harper had never seen before. She logged into her email, her online banking, her world. The unveiling happened in stark, brutal, black and white on the laptop screen. Their joint savings account, the one that had held a staggering 7-figure sum, was nearly empty. A wire transfer had been made 2 days ago, the day after the merger, for almost the entire balance to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The transaction notes were chillingly mundane. Investment transfer. Her credit card statement was a digital trail of his betrayal. Lavish dinners in Chicago. A first-class, one-way ticket from Chicago to Paris. A charge from the Ritz-Carlton in Paris. A purchase at a Cartier boutique on the Place Vendôme. The final charge, made just yesterday, was for 2 one-way tickets from Paris to Buenos Aires. Lyra stared at the screen, her face a mask of disbelief. She made no sound. It was as if the shock was too profound for tears, too deep for any outward expression. She just sat there, her hand hovering over the trackpad, her world collapsing into pixels and transaction histories. "He didn't just leave," she whispered, the words barely audible. "He planned this. He drained everything." Harper finally broke. "Lyra, I'm so sorry." She reached for her friend's hand, but Lyra pulled away, her focus still locked on the screen. With a final, decisive click, she opened a news site, typing Daniel's name into the search bar. And there it was, the gossip blog post, now picked up by more mainstream outlets. The grainy photo of Daniel and Celeste laughing in Paris. The headlines were cruel and sensational. Tech Titan's Parisian getaway. Rowe celebrates merger with stunning VP. The image was the final, definitive piece of the puzzle. The financial ruin was devastating, but this was a public spectacle. He hadn't just abandoned her, he had humiliated her. He had toasted his success with another woman while she lay bleeding, while their son fought for his first breaths. The power imbalance of their relationship had never been clearer. He held all the cards, all the money, all the power, and he had used it to erase her. A single dry sob escaped Lyra's lips. It was a sound of such profound desolation that it seemed to suck all the air from the room. She slowly closed the laptop. The click echoed in the silence. "The hospital," she said, her voice hollow. "The bills for Ethan." The fairy tale had not just ended. It had been a meticulously crafted lie. The glass castle had been a cage, and the prince had been a monster. Now she was left in the rubble, with a premature baby in a plastic box, and a mountain of debt that bore her husband's name. The unveiling was complete. She was not just abandoned, she was destitute, alone, and facing a battle for her child's life with nothing but the name of the man who had tried to destroy her. The name Rowe had once been a key, unlocking doors to the most exclusive restaurants, securing front-row seats at sold-out shows, and commanding a certain hushed reverence. Now it was an anchor, dragging Lyra down into a maelstrom of public scandal and private debt. The story, with its irresistible cocktail of wealth, sex, and betrayal, was a media firestorm. Her face, a candid photo taken at a charity gala months ago, was splashed across tabloids and websites next to the grainy bistro picture of Daniel and Celeste, the betrayed wife, the millionaire's pregnant victim. She had been reduced to a tragic, one-dimensional character in her own life story. The hospital, once a sanctuary, became a fishbowl. Reporters, disguised as visitors with wilting bouquets, tried to sneak onto the maternity floor. A particularly brazen photographer had been caught trying to get into the NICU, hoping for a shot of the abandoned miracle baby. The hospital administration, smelling a lawsuit and a PR nightmare, moved Lyra to a more secluded room under an assumed name and posted a security guard at the end of the hall. The weight of the Rowe name brought another, more insidious pressure: Daniel's family. His parents, Victor and Claudia Rowe, were old money, a dynasty of bankers and industrialists who viewed Daniel's flashy tech success with a mixture of pride and disdain. They called once. Victor's voice was cold, clipped, and devoid of sympathy. "A terrible business, Lyra," he'd said, as if discussing a dip in the stock market. "Daniel has always been impulsive. We are, of course, making a donation to the hospital to ensure the child receives the best care. A donation, not help, not support. A tax-deductible transaction to manage the family's image. His name is Ethan," Lyra had said, her voice trembling with a rage she didn't know she possessed. "He is your grandson." "Yes, well," Victor had coughed. "The situation is complicated. Daniel has made his choices. We trust you will handle this matter with the discretion the Rowe name deserves." Discretion. He wanted her to disappear quietly, to swallow the humiliation and the debt, to protect the family name that Daniel had so spectacularly tarnished. The power imbalance was staggering. They had the resources to make this nightmare disappear for her, but their only concern was protecting the brand. She was an inconvenient, messy loose end. After the call, Lyra felt a profound shift within her. The grief was still there, a vast, hollow ache in her chest. But beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. A cold, hard fury. They wanted discretion. They wanted her to be the silent, dignified victim. She would not give them the satisfaction. Her days fell into a grueling new rhythm. She'd spend hours by Ethan's incubator, her hand pressed against the plastic, whispering stories to him, telling him about the world outside, the one she would build for them. She read medical journals, grilled the nurses and doctors about every aspect of his care, and learned to navigate the complex machinery that was keeping her son alive. The NICU was a world of hushed anxiety, of tiny victories and terrifying setbacks. One day, Ethan would gain an ounce. The next, his oxygen levels would plummet, sending alarms screaming and nurses rushing. In this crucible of fear, Lyra discovered a strength she never knew she had. The pampered, protected woman Daniel had created was being burned away, leaving behind someone tougher, someone forged in the fire of crisis. Harper was her rock, her tireless general. She dealt with the lawyers Lyra had to hire, a pro bono team from a women's advocacy group. They were trying to freeze what little was left of Daniel's assets in the country and navigate the labyrinthine process of international law to go after the money he'd stolen. It was a long shot, they admitted, but it was a shot. One afternoon, as Lyra was preparing to leave the NICU, she overheard two nurses talking in hushed tones at the station. "Did you see the latest? He's been spotted in Rio. Page 6 has pictures. With that blonde woman? It's disgusting. His poor wife." Lyra's stomach clenched. She walked back to her room, her hands shaking, and pulled up the website on her phone. There they were. Daniel and Celeste on a sun-drenched beach in Rio de Janeiro. They were laughing, tanned, and beautiful. Daniel had his arm wrapped around her, his hand resting on her flat stomach. The caption was a knife to the heart. Moving on, Daniel Rowe and Celeste Morel spark pregnancy rumors in Brazil. Something inside Lyra snapped. The carefully constructed wall of composure she'd built around herself crumbled into dust. It wasn't just that he had moved on. It was the grotesque symmetry of it all. He had abandoned one pregnant partner for another, trading in his old life for a new one, with a sickening, casual cruelty. She thought of Victor Rowe's demand for discretion. She thought of the world watching, pitying her, judging her. She looked at the picture of her own son, so tiny and fragile, fighting for every breath, his life sustained by machines and the kindness of strangers. The weight of the Rowe name was suffocating. It represented everything she had lost, every lie she had been told. But it was also the only thing she had left, the only weapon in her arsenal. That night, she made a decision. She called Harper. "I want to issue a statement," Lyra said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor. It was calm, clear, and cold as steel. Not as a victim, not as a Rowe, as Ethan's mother. And I want to do it on my own terms. She would no longer be a footnote in Daniel's scandalous story. She would not be the silent, betrayed wife. She would be the woman who fought back, not for money or for revenge, but for the one thing that now mattered, the future of her son. She would take the weight of that tarnished name and turn it into a shield, a platform, a declaration of her own survival. The world would know her not as Mrs. Daniel Rowe, but as Lyra, the mother of Ethan. And she was just beginning to fight. The statement, released through her lawyers, was a masterpiece of controlled fury. It was short, dignified, and devastating. It confirmed the timeline of Daniel's abandonment, the financial draining of their accounts, and the birth of their son, Ethan. It made no mention of Celeste, no pleas for sympathy, no hint of personal anguish. It simply stated the facts and concluded with a single, powerful sentence. My sole focus is the health and recovery of my son, and I will be taking all necessary legal actions to secure the resources required for his care, resources that were stolen from him by his father. The public narrative shifted overnight. The pity turned to respect, the salacious gossip to outrage on her behalf. She was no longer just a victim. She was a mother fighting for her child against a villain of almost cartoonish proportions. Small donations began to trickle into a fund Harper had set up. Local businesses sent gift baskets to the hospital. A community of strangers, moved by her quiet strength, was wrapping its arms around her. This external support was a balm, but the real work, the true rebuilding, was happening in the small, quiet moments. It was in the first time she was allowed to hold Ethan, a practice known as kangaroo care. The nurse carefully lifted him from the incubator, a tiny bundle of wires and warmth, and placed him on Lyra's bare chest. The feeling of his fragile skin against hers, his tiny head nestled under her chin, was the most profound experience of her life. In that moment, the ghost of Daniel, the weight of his betrayal, seemed to recede, pushed back by the overwhelming, primal force of her love for this child. Rebuilding her life was a process of reclaiming fragments. It started with her name. When the nurses would call her Mrs. Rowe, she began to gently correct them. "It's Lyra, please." It was a small act of defiance, a shedding of an identity that no longer fit. It continued with her finances. With Harper's help, she pieced together the wreckage, The penthouse was a rental, its lease paid up for another 2 months. After that, she would have to move. The art she had so lovingly curated was considered a marital asset, now tangled in a legal battle she had no resources to fight. She sold the few pieces of jewelry Daniel had given her that held no sentimental value. The gaudy diamond earrings, the ostentatious necklace. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was her money, earned from the ashes of her old life. She started a blog. At first, it was just a way to update the small circle of people who cared about Ethan's progress. She wrote about the terrifying roller coaster of the NICU, the small victories, the setbacks. She wrote with a raw, unflinching honesty that resonated with people. Soon she was receiving messages from other NICU mothers from around the country, sharing their own stories, offering advice and solidarity. She had stumbled into a community she never knew existed, a tribe of fierce, loving, and terrified parents. She was no longer just Lyra, the abandoned wife. She was a voice for them, a chronicler of their shared journey. Meanwhile, in Buenos Aires, Daniel's new life was beginning to lose its luster. The initial thrill of the escape, the intoxicating freedom, was giving way to a more complicated reality. Buenos Aires was beautiful, a city of passion and faded European grandeur. But it was also a city where he was a nobody. His name, Daniel Rowe, meant nothing here. The power and influence he had wielded so effortlessly in Viridia were gone. Celeste, who had been so exciting and adventurous in the context of their illicit affair, was different now. The thrill of the forbidden had been replaced by the mundane reality of cohabitation. She was demanding, her moods shifting with the tides. The pregnancy, which had seemed like a romantic, impulsive decision in the heat of the moment, was now a looming, terrifying responsibility. He had traded one set of expectations for another, and he was beginning to suspect he had made a terrible bargain. He found himself thinking about Lyra at odd times. He remembered her quiet laugh, the way she would look at a painting, completely lost in its world. He remembered the peace he felt, just being in the same room with her. He had told himself he was leaving because she was too passive, too content, that she didn't share his fire. Now he realized that her stillness hadn't been passivity. It had been strength. She was the anchor, and he had foolishly cut the rope, imagining he could fly. He secretly read Lyra's blog. He devoured every word, his heart twisting with a toxic cocktail of guilt, jealousy, and a strange, unwelcome pride. He saw the pictures of Ethan, his son, a child he had never held, and a profound, aching emptiness opened up inside him. He saw the comments from strangers praising Lyra's courage, her grace, her resilience. This was not the weak, dependent woman he had told himself he was leaving. This was a stranger, a warrior, a mother, and she was building a life, fragment by fragment, that had no place for him in it. The realization was a cold, terrifying dread that settled deep in his bones. He had not escaped to freedom. He had exiled himself to a prison of his own making. The cracks in Daniel's gilded cage began to show in the smallest of ways. It started with the language. In Viridia, his words had weight. They moved markets, launched products, and bent people to his will. In Buenos Aires, his Spanish was clumsy, halting. He was constantly misunderstood, forced to rely on Celeste to navigate simple transactions, a dependency that chafed at his ego. The power dynamic had inverted. Here, she was the guide, and he was the tourist, a man stripped of his native tongue and the authority that came with it. Then there was the money. The millions he had stolen, which had seemed like an infinite fortune, were dwindling at an alarming rate. Celeste had a taste for luxury that made Lyra's quiet elegance seem monastic in comparison. There were shopping sprees for designer maternity wear, lavish dinners at exclusive restaurants, and a constant, draining demand for gifts and reassurances. He was no longer Daniel Rowe, the brilliant innovator. He was a walking ATM, and his value seemed directly proportional to his balance. The pregnancy, his supposed reason for this new life, felt like a sham. Celeste treated it as an accessory, a source of drama and attention. She complained endlessly about the physical discomforts, but showed little interest in the child itself. When Daniel tried to talk about names or plans for the baby's future, she would wave a dismissive hand. "There's plenty of time for that, darling. Let's just enjoy this." But Daniel wasn't enjoying it. He was haunted. He'd lie awake in their expensive, soullessly modern apartment, the sounds of the city filtering through the windows, and the face of a child he'd never met would swim in his vision. Ethan. He would whisper the name into the darkness. It felt foreign and painful on his tongue. He became obsessed with Lyra's blog, a secret ritual he performed in the dead of night while Celeste slept. He read about Ethan's first time breathing without a ventilator, a milestone Lyra described with such breathtaking, poetic joy that Daniel felt a physical ache in his chest. He read about her struggles with the insurance company, her small victories against a faceless bureaucracy. He saw the photos she posted, her hand wrapped around Ethan's impossibly tiny one, her face tired but radiant as she held her son against her chest. He was witnessing her transformation from a distance, and it was agonizing. The woman he had left behind was not the woman on the screen. The Lyra he had known was quiet, accommodating, her life revolving around his. This Lyra was a fighter. She was building a community, a purpose, a life from the rubble he had left her in. She was becoming a hero in a story where he was unequivocally the villain. The flicker of conscience ignited one rainy afternoon. Celeste was out shopping, and Daniel was aimlessly scrolling through the news from home when he saw it, a feature article on a local Viridia news site. The headline was, "The Lion of the NICU, How One Mother's Fight for Her Son is Inspiring a City." The article was about Lyra and Ethan. It detailed her story without the salaciousness of the tabloids. It spoke of her grace under pressure, her advocacy for other NICU families, and the incredible progress Ethan was making against all odds. It included a quote from Dr. Samuel. "In my 20 years as a neonatologist, I have rarely seen a bond as strong as the one between Lyra and her son. Her strength is, without a doubt, a major factor in his recovery." Daniel felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Her strength. He had always seen her as the fragile one, the one who needed his protection. He had used that as his justification for leaving, telling himself he was setting her free from a life she wasn't built for. The lie was so stark, so pathetic, he almost laughed. He hadn't been protecting her. He had been containing her. His presence, his wealth, his grand plans, they had been a cage, and it was only in his absence that she had learned how to fly. He scrolled down, and there was a video embedded in the article. It was from a fundraiser for the hospital's NICU, an event Lyra had organized. She stood at a podium, not in a designer gown, but in a simple, elegant dress. She looked thinner, her face etched with a weariness he had never seen before. But her eyes held a fire that was entirely new. She spoke about Ethan, her voice clear and strong, filled with a love so pure and powerful, it felt like a physical force. "They call him a fighter," she said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "But all babies are fighters. They fight for that first breath, for that first ounce of weight, for that first step. Our only job is to be strong enough to fight alongside them." As she spoke, a wave of shame so profound it made him physically ill washed over Daniel. He saw the man in the mirror, The coward who had run away, the thief who had stolen his own son's future, the fool who had traded a universe of quiet, steadfast love for a handful of glittering dust. He thought of the Cartier bracelet he had bought for Celeste in Paris, a bauble to appease her, and compared it to the cost of a single day of Ethan's care. The moral calculus was horrifying. He had not just made a mistake, he had committed a sin. He closed the laptop, his hands trembling. The rain beat against the window, blurring the city into a grey watercolour. The life he had chosen felt empty, a hollow echo of the one he had so carelessly destroyed. For the first time since he'd stepped on that plane to Paris, Daniel Rowe felt the crushing weight of his own actions. It was not regret. Not yet. It was the first, terrifying flicker of a conscience he thought he had long since extinguished. And in the dim, rainy light of his self-imposed exile, he began to understand that the road to redemption, if it existed at all, was longer and darker than he could ever have imagined. 2 months after Ethan's dramatic arrival, Lyra walked out of the NICU and into the bright, crisp autumn air, holding her son. It was a moment she had dreamed of, prayed for, and fought for with every fibre of her being. Ethan, though still small, was healthy. He was breathing on his own, gaining weight, and leaving the world of beeps and wires behind. Leaving the hospital felt like a rebirth for them both. The penthouse, with its ghosts and its painful memories, was gone. With the last of her jewellery money and the first small payment from a freelance writing gig she'd picked up, Lyra had rented a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet, tree-lined neighbourhood, far from the glitz of downtown. It was modest, with slightly scuffed hardwood floors and radiators that hissed in the night. But it was hers. It was their sanctuary. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the overwhelming, terrifying joy of being solely responsible for this tiny human being. The silence of the apartment was different from the silence of the penthouse or the hospital. This was a peaceful quiet, filled with the soft gurgles and sighs of a sleeping baby. It was the sound of a life being built, not one being broken. Her blog had become a source of modest income, with companies that made baby products paying for small, tasteful advertisements. More importantly, it had become her purpose. She was a voice, a source of comfort and information for parents who were lost in the same terrifying wilderness she had just escaped. She was no longer just Ethan's mother. She was part of a larger family. One crisp November morning, as she was bouncing a fussy Ethan on her hip and trying to type a blog post with one hand, her phone rang. It was an unknown number with an international code. Her heart lurched. She ignored it. It rang again, and again. On the 4th try, a grim curiosity got the better of her. She answered, her voice cautious. "Hello? Lyra?" The voice was instantly recognizable, yet strangely diminished. It was Daniel. The sound of it, after all these months, sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She said nothing. "Lyra, please don't hang up," he said, his voice ragged. I know I have no right to call, but I saw your blog. I saw that Ethan is home. Is he okay?" Lyra looked down at her son, his big, dark eyes staring up at her. A protective rage, fierce and absolute, surged through her. "He is no concern of yours," she said, her voice dangerously cold. "You forfeited the right to ask that question when you got on a plane to Paris." "I know," he whispered. "God, Lyra, I know. I was a fool. I was a coward. I made a mistake that I can never undo." He sounded broken, a hollowed-out version of the confident, charismatic man she had married. "Celeste, we're not together anymore. The baby. There was no baby." She lied. It was all a lie to get me to leave with her. The confession, which should have felt like a victory, a vindication, just felt pathetic. His grand, romantic escape was built on a foundation as rotten as his character. It didn't change anything. "Your life is not my concern, Daniel," she said, her voice flat. "Ethan and I are fine. We don't need anything from you." "But I need to do something," he insisted, his voice rising with desperation. "The money, Lyra, I can send it back. I have some of it left. I can help. Let me help." The offer was an insult. Did he think he could buy his way back from the abyss? Did he think a wire transfer could heal the wounds he had inflicted? "We don't want your stolen money, Daniel. I'm handling it. Now, if you'll excuse me, my son needs me." Before he could reply, she felt it, a low, tightening cramp in her abdomen. It was familiar, a ghost of the pain that had started this whole nightmare. But this was different. It wasn't the sharp, tearing pain of the abruption. It was a deep, rhythmic clenching. She gasped, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the phone. "Lyra, are you okay? What's wrong?" Daniel's voice was sharp with alarm. She couldn't answer. Another wave rolled through her, stronger this time. It was impossible. She had already given birth. She had a C-section scar to prove it. But the sensation was undeniable. It was a contraction. She hung up on Daniel, her mind reeling. She stumbled to the sofa, Ethan clutched tightly to her chest. The pain was real, primal, and terrifyingly familiar. She fumbled for her phone and called Harper, her voice a choked whisper. "Something's happening. I think I'm in labor." Harper, ever the voice of reason, was there in 10 minutes, her face a mask of worried confusion. "Lyra, that's impossible. You had a C-section." "I know what a contraction feels like, Harper," Lyra cried out as another one seized her, forcing the air from her lungs. The ride to the hospital was a surreal blur. In the emergency room, a young, bewildered-looking doctor examined her, his expression growing more perplexed by the second. I don't understand," he stammered. "Your C-section is healing perfectly, but you are, without a doubt, having contractions." It was an older, more experienced obstetrician who finally solved the puzzle. She looked at Lyra's chart, at the story of the placental abruption, the emergency C-section, the premature birth of Ethan. Then she looked at the ultrasound screen. "My God," the doctor breathed, her eyes wide. "I've only read about this in textbooks. It's exceedingly rare." She turned to Lyra, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Mrs. Rowe, Lyra, you were pregnant with twins." The words hung in the air, impossible, and yet, somehow, making a terrifying kind of sense. "The abruption," the doctor explained, her voice soft. "It only affected one placenta, the one supporting Ethan. We got him out, and the bleeding stopped. We had no reason to suspect. No one would have. Your uterus was still enlarged, which is normal post-delivery. We thought it was just the aftermath." She pointed to the screen. "But this little one, she stayed put. Her placenta was intact. She's been growing in there this whole time, and she's decided that today is her birthday." Lyra stared at the screen, at the flickering image of a perfectly formed, full-term baby. A daughter. A sister for Ethan. A secret she had carried for 2 months without knowing. The contractions were not a phantom pain. They were a new beginning, a life that had weathered the storm in secret, waiting for its moment. As they wheeled her to the delivery room, a profound, almost mystical sense of calm settled over her. She had thought her body had betrayed her, that her life had been shattered into a million pieces. But all this time, it had been holding a secret, a miracle. The first contraction had not been an ending. It had been an intermission. This was the second act. This was the true birth of her new life, a life of impossible, breathtaking surprises. She was not just a survivor. She was a mother, twice over. And she was ready. Lyra named her daughter Lila, meaning the Golden One. Born healthy, screaming, and full term, she was the golden dawn after the longest, darkest night. Bringing her home to the little apartment, to the brother who had unknowingly shared a womb with her, felt like the final, definitive piece of Lyra's new life clicking into place. The apartment, once just a refuge, now felt full, a bustling, chaotic, and joyful home. Her life was a whirlwind of tandem feedings, double diaper changes, and a love so expansive it left her breathless. Ethan, the fragile warrior, was thriving. He watched his sister with a wide-eyed curiosity, his tiny hand occasionally reaching out to touch her soft cheek. They were a trinity, a complete, self-contained universe. The story of the surprise twin became a media sensation, a feel-good coda to the tragic tale that had gripped the city. It was a story of hope, of miracles, of life's astonishing capacity for renewal. Lyra, now a reluctant celebrity, used the platform to further her advocacy, her blog becoming a lifeline for parents of multiples and preemies. She was no longer just surviving, she was flourishing. It was into this world of hard-won peace that Daniel returned. He didn't call, he just appeared, a ghost on her doorstep one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Lyra opened the door with Lila sleeping soundly in a sling against her chest, and there he was. He looked diminished. The charismatic swagger was gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out weariness. He was thinner, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes shadowed with a pain that was no longer glamorous, just pathetic. "Lyra," he breathed, his voice hoarse. She froze, her hand tightening on the doorknob. Her first instinct was to slam the door in his face, but she didn't. She looked at him, at the man who was a stranger to her now, and felt nothing. Not hatred, not love, not even pity. Just a vast, empty distance. "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked, her voice calm. He flinched at her tone, at the absence of the Lyra he had always used. "I came back," he said, as if this were a grand, heroic act. I heard about the baby. The second baby. Our daughter, my daughter," she corrected him, her voice like ice. "Yes," he said, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Your daughter." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Lyra, I was wrong. I know that. I destroyed everything. But I want to make it right. I want to be a father. To both of them. To Ethan and... What's her name?" The question, his ignorance of his own daughter's name, was so profoundly insulting that Lyra almost laughed. "You don't get to do this, Daniel," she said, her voice low and steady. "You don't get to shatter a life and then come back to pick up the prettiest pieces. That's not how it works. I'll do anything," he begged, taking a step forward. "I've started paying back the money. I sold everything I had left. I'm working with the lawyers. I want to provide for them. I want to be here." From inside the apartment, Ethan started to cry, a thin, demanding wail. Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a desperate, hungry curiosity. Is that him?" "You need to leave," Lyra said, her body forming a protective barrier in the doorway. "Please, Lyra," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. It was a performance she had seen before, the well-practiced contrition of a man used to getting his way. But the director had changed. She was no longer a part of his cast. "Just let me see him. Let me see them. They're my children." "They are my children," she repeated, her voice ringing with an authority he had never heard from her before. "I am the one who stayed. I am the one who held Ethan's hand when his lungs were failing. I am the one who gave birth to Lila alone in a hospital room. I am the one who walks the floors with them at 3 a.m., who knows what their cries mean, who is building them a life on the ashes of the one you burned down. You are not their father, Daniel. You are their donor. A biological fact. Nothing more. Each word was a stone, and he visibly crumbled under their weight. This was not the reunion he had envisioned. In his mind, there would be tears, anger, but ultimately, the forgiveness he felt he was owed. He had not factored in her strength. He had not factored in her indifference. "I love you, Lyra," he said, a final, desperate gambit. The words which had once been the center of her universe now sounded hollow, meaningless. "No, Daniel," she said, a sad, final wisdom in her voice. "You don't love me. You love the idea of me. You love the idea of a family you can come home to when your other adventures fail. You love the idea of forgiveness without the work of redemption. But you don't get to have it. Not on your terms. Not anymore." She took a step back, her hand still on the doorknob. "Goodbye, Daniel." And with that, she closed the door, the soft click of the latch a definitive, final sound. She leaned against the wood, her heart hammering, the warmth of Lila against her chest a grounding presence. She listened as his footsteps hesitated, then slowly, defeatedly, walked away. The return was over. He had come back expecting to find the ruins of a life he could rebuild in his own image, but he had found a fortress instead, one he no longer had the key to. The months that followed Daniel's return were a study in the complexities of human connection. He did not, as Lyra had half expected, disappear again. Instead, he began a slow, arduous, and deeply humbling pilgrimage towards something that might, one day, resemble atonement. He communicated only through his lawyers. He funneled every cent he earned from a new, less glamorous consulting job into a trust for the children. He sold his last remaining assets, the designer watches and sports car he'd had in storage, the price of his vanity now converted into diaper funds and college savings. He made no demands. He asked for no contact. He simply quietly began to pay his dues. Lyra watched from a distance, her heart a tangle of conflicting emotions. The rage had subsided, leaving behind a deep, resonant sadness for the man he could have been, for the life they could have had. But there was no regret. Her life, the one she had forged in the fire, was full and vibrant. Her blog had grown into a small business, a brand synonymous with honest, resilient motherhood. She did online workshops, wrote a column for a parenting magazine, and was in talks to write a book. She had built a career from the rubble, a life that was entirely her own. The question of Daniel's role, however, remained. Could a man who had committed such a profound betrayal ever truly be a father? Did her children deserve to know the man whose DNA they shared, even if that man was broken? She found her answer not in anger or in forgiveness, but in pragmatism. She looked at Ethan, now a babbling, crawling toddler, and at Lila, whose first smile could light up the entire apartment, and she knew she could not be the sole arbiter of their story. She could not erase their father, no matter how much she might want to. To do so would be to lie to them, and her new life was built on a foundation of truth. She arranged the first meeting on neutral ground, a quiet corner of a public park on a sunny Saturday morning. Harper came with her, a silent, watchful guardian. Lyra sat on a bench, the double stroller in front of her, her heart pounding. Daniel approached slowly, his hands shoved nervously in his pockets. He looked older, the last of his boyish charm finally extinguished. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes fixed on the children with a raw, aching hunger. "Hello, Lyra," he said, his voice quiet. She just nodded. "They're beautiful," he whispered, his gaze locked on the two small faces in the stroller. "They are," she agreed. She had rehearsed what she would say. She had prepared a speech about boundaries, about expectations, about the long, uncertain road ahead. But looking at him now, at the sheer, unadulterated longing in his eyes, she realized that the terms were simple. "This is not for you, Daniel," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And it is not for me. This is for them. You will not be Dad. Not for a long time. Maybe never. You will be Daniel. You will be a man who is part of their story. A man who is trying to make up for a terrible mistake. You will be consistent. You will be honest. You will never, ever make a promise to them that you cannot keep. If you can agree to that, you may see them. Once a week. For 1 hour. Here." Tears streamed down his face, silent and unheeded. He didn't try to speak, to bargain, to defend himself. He just nodded, a series of short, jerky movements, his entire being consumed by a gratitude so profound it was painful to watch. He knelt, slowly, cautiously, in front of the stroller. He looked at Ethan, at his dark, serious eyes, so like his own. He looked at Lila, at the faint dusting of golden hair on her head. He didn't reach out to touch them. He just looked, his face a canvas of regret and wonder. "Hello, Ethan," he whispered. "Hello, Lila." It was not a Hollywood ending. There were no grand declarations of forgiveness, no tearful reunions, no rekindling of a lost love. Love was not a part of this equation anymore. What was being built here was something far more fragile, more complex, and perhaps more real. It was a quiet dawn. Lyra watched him, this broken man who was the father of her children, and felt a sense of closure that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with her. Her redemption had not come from his return or his remorse. It had come from her own strength. It had come from the first time she held Ethan against her skin, from the surprise contraction that announced Lila's arrival, from the quiet moments in her little apartment where she had built a world of love and safety all on her own. She had faced the ultimate betrayal, and had not only survived, but had been reborn. She was a mother, a writer, a warrior. Her fairy tale had been a lie, but the life she had built in its place was true. And as she watched Daniel say a soft, hesitant goodbye to the children he was only just beginning to know, she turned her face to the sun, ready for the next chapter, a story she would write entirely on her own terms. Lyra's journey from the depths of betrayal to the quiet strength of her new dawn is a testament to the incredible power of resilience. It's a story that reminds us that even when our worlds collapse, we have the strength within us to rebuild, to redefine our lives, and to find love and purpose in the most unexpected places. If this story of survival, motherhood, and the complex road to redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true-to-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart. Thank you for watching. 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 Thank you for watching.
So words change, is my point. Like the word handicapped, right? Again, traditionally, that was the politically correct term, the all-inclusive term for cripples and shit, right? But then they went, no, we want to be disabled. They didn't want to be disabled. They said, we want to be referred to as disabled. We don't like the term handicapped anymore. Stop using it. Say disabled. And we went, okay, fine. And that's great. Just tell me the rules. And in fact, I'm a stickler for the rules. Like, if I was on a beach and a woman came running up and went, help, help, my handicapped toddler's drowning, I'd go, sorry, you're what, love? What? My handicapped toddler's drowning, he can't swim. Whoa, do you mean your disabled toddler is drowning? She go, yeah. I go, right, well, let's... Oh, dead. Wasted too much time being woke, didn't I? Well, I am woke now, and I can prove it. Here you go. I love illegal immigrants. Yeah, sue me now. Sometimes I go down to Dover for the day, right? And I look out, right? I look for a boat, and I see a dinghy with about 60 of them, and I go over here, like, right? And I pull them into shore, and I go, women and children first. They go, there are no women and children. Just you lads, is it? Just, come on, lads. Come on, lads. If I go down there one day and there's no boat, I am absolutely fucking gutted. I just sort of wander into town, and I stand by the traffic lights, and I wait for a big lorry to pull up, right? And I look underneath, and there's a lad sort of clutching like that. And I go, where you headed? And he goes, Gary Lineker's house. I go, it's just down there. Yeah. Fuck borders. Fuck, we don't need borders, do we? Be like the Vikings. They didn't care about borders, did they? I've got a little bit of Viking blood in me. Well, we all have, because of all the raping they did. They say it was raping and pillaging, but I think it was mainly for the raping. I think they added the pillaging bit for the wives. I mean, they went down one day and went, right, we're off to Great Britain. Oh, why? Just a bit of pillaging. Just pillaging. Just pillaging, babe. All right. Why are you wearing your rape hat? So this show is called Armageddon, and it's all about how I think humanity might end, because there's a long list of possibilities, you know. We're on a precipice, you know. It could be anything from global warming, the rise of the pandemic, you know, nuclear war, our own stupidity, basically. Because we are getting more stupid as a species, no doubt about that. You can now do a university degree course in Taylor Swift. How fucking low academically can you go? There's an institute in London called the School of Flower Arranging. I went past it, I couldn't believe it. School of Flower Arranging. I looked in, and there's people having lectures. Flower arranging. My mum used to pick flowers every day from the garden, cut flowers, put them in vase. Fuck me. Oh, sorry, Jack, can't afford your tennis racket. We've got to spend all the money on a ramp and a motorised wheelchair for this money-grabbing little fucking... Why do you need a motorised one? No arms. That's fair enough. That is fair enough. I can tell some of you feel a bit uncomfortable laughing at little Timmy, who's a little 6-year-old lad. He's got a funny little voice because his chest is all fucked. Got no arms, no legs, just like stumps, right? But let me tell you something about Timmy to make you feel better about yourselves. He's a fucking racist. Yes. Horrible little shit, he is. You little fucking bigot. You disgusting little fucking racist, you racist scum, you filthy little fucking, you fascist, you fucking, you disgust me. Homophobic? Yeah. He's like, they're not like us. Nothing's like you disgusting little fucking, you prejudiced little piece of, you ball of hate, you disgusting little fucking racist homophobe. I wish we'd had a scan. You absolute, misogynist. If he could, he'd rape. There's your little Timmy.